Monza, beautiful weather, lovely in Italy at this time of year, big crowd, lots of expectation around Ferrari. Why not? It's the Tifosi, long straights, the two chicanes, the Lesmos, the Scadi, the Parabolica. Can't beat it really. So good to be back at Monza. Great to see the cars in low downforce set up as well. One of the byproducts of that is that DRS is less effective as a result. That's brilliant. So let's have a look at what happened today. First of all, the times on soft tyres in FP2. The track was evolving quite dramatically and there were a few stand-in drivers in FP1. Oscar Piastri didn't get out, Alexander Dunn in his car. So that potentially gave Lando a little bit of an edge going into FP2. And Lando indeed quickest, 19.878. Charles Leclerc, that was on his second push lap on his one set of soft tyres. So good lap time by Charles Leclerc. Carlos Sainz and indeed Alex Albon, both Williams going really well today, 19.9 under the 20-second barrier. Oscar Piastri 20.0. Get onto that in a second. Lewis Hamilton not far behind Charles, 20.0. Actually quickest in FP1 today. So Lewis going out on soft tyres, admittedly, at which point everybody else was on medium, starting to do some fuel runs at the back end of FP1. Lewis did that time then. Track getting a little bit quicker too. Nonetheless, not bad for the ego. And so he's up there. Max Verstappen, 20.0 in a Red Bull that's got quite a revised floor. Everybody running less downforce in terms of front and rear wing, but Red Bull going a step further, revised floor. And the impression I got was that Max quite likes it. Didn't really get in a lap. Lots and lots of traffic doing that. And a few other dramas. The car was quite stiff on his first run as well. He had a bit of a moment, lost the rear. Well, he said he lost the rear coming out of the second Lesmo. Indeed, it wasn't visible, even on board, just classic Max. He just comes out and says, oh, I've lost the back end's gone. But then he did another lap, and that was that lap time, admittedly, in traffic. Alex Albon, as I say, very quick in the Williams-Mercedes, and the other one. Nico Hülkenberg, also really impressive, I thought, in the Sauber today, the Sauber Ferrari, 20.2. We'll talk about him in a little bit. Yuki Tsunoda also up there, doing quite a good job, 20.2, and George Russell, who ground to a halt at the back end of FP1 with some sort of gearbox problem, but no real issue, didn't have to change anything. Not happy with the car in FP1, but starting to dance with the music, as we'll see in FP2. So let's focus now on the key elements of those laps and the performance we saw today. And obviously top speed at Monza counts for a lot. And I said that Nico Hülkenberg, we'd get onto that in a minute. Look how quick he is through the pit straight. These are the actual speeds they did on their quickest laps, as distinct from what you get on the FIA timing sheets, the fastest one, which doesn't take into account, of course, toes or anything like that. So these are real speeds, and that's the top speed after the start-finish line. Interesting that they're still flat on the throttle in 8th as they go past the finish line, obviously. And then the track gets narrow as they approach the braking area for turn 1. But long before the braking area, all the cars are losing 3 to 4 kilometers an hour because the track's just getting narrower. Maybe there's some sort of wind effect there as well, aero effect on the cars. But just before there, Nico Hülkenberg quickest in the Sauber Ferrari, 3:46, but he was able to back that up with a good lap time as well. Ferrari looking very good, 3:44, Charles Leclerc, and you can immediately drop to the bottom of the list there, look where McLaren are, 3:37, 3:36. So on that basis, Ferrari 10 kilometers an hour quicker through the air. That could be a massive advantage for them going into the race. I say advantage because for sure they're not going to be as good as the McLaren in terms of tyre management, the slow corners, indeed the medium, and even the fast corners, all the corners in reality. But top speed, Ferrari, pretty impressive. Yuki Tsunoda 3:43, Max Verstappen 3:41. I think that just shows that Max didn't really get a great lap in today. But Red Bull, not that bad in terms of top speed as well. Lewis Hamilton backing up Charles Leclerc, 3:42. Williams 3:41, 3:39. You'd normally say, well, Williams very, very quick in a straight line. But look at that. They've got a good top speed commensurate with the lap time they're doing. So I think that's very impressive. And George Russell not too far away in the factory Mercedes as well. Here I should say that Kimi Antonelli, again showing that he's not very comfortable on fast corners, had 2 moments in both FP1 and FP2, went off and got stuck in the gravel trap out of the first Lesmo in the second session, which brought out the red flag for a while. So Kimi Antonelli having a bit of a thing about Monza now, Parabolica last year, and this year so far Ascari and Lesmo, all quick corners or going into quick corners. So we'll see how he develops tomorrow, but looking obviously not bad on the slow corners as well. And now going into the Parabolica, top speed going into the Parabolica, obviously not quite as long a straight there, so the speeds aren't as high. But look at Charles Leclerc, 339 coming out of Ascari into the Parabolica. Very impressive. We'll get onto that again in a second. Nico Hülkenberg continuing to be competitive in terms of the top speeds there, 335. Lewis Hamilton, 334. Considerably slower than Charles, you've got to say, in the same car going into the Parabolica, bearing in mind that he wasn't far away in terms of top speed at the end of the pit straight. So Lewis losing a little bit coming out of Ascari, going into top speed territory there. Alex Albon, very good. Same as Carlos Sainz, both Williams there. Lando Norris, 333. Oscar Piastri, 330. Interesting comparison there. Max Verstappen, 332. Not brilliantly quick. Same as Yuki Tsunoda. Again, more than anything, I think that reflects that Max didn't get the best from the car today and didn't have the clearest of runs either. Most cars, most drivers had traffic, but Max seemed to have more than most. This is an interesting one. And it is accurate in terms of their quickest lap on soft tyres. But of course, there will be other laps as well that come into play. I took a measurement point in the straight line acceleration out of Ascari before they get to terminal velocity, just when they're accelerating through the gears, they're going 5th, 6th, 7th into 8th. Lando Norris picks up 21 over that measured section that I had, 21 kilometers per hour. Charles Leclerc, 20. Lewis Hamilton, 20, you can see. George Russell, 19. Max, only 18. And Oscar Piastri, only 17. Now, I've gone on a lot over the years about this is one of the critical, well, that's not the critical, it's one of the most obvious places on the planet Earth where a driver can come out of a left-hander and the next corner is a right-hander. So at some point, he's got to be coming out on the right, and then he's got to move the car back to the left before the right-hander. And there's, unlike most circuits, there's a lot of time and a lot of room on which to make that move. And bear in mind that with these cars, the amount of drag and friction that's coming from through the tires to the road and the downforce they're running, the millisecond you move the steering wheel, lateral G is going through the car, and specifically through the engine, moving the car from the right-hand side of the track to the left-hand side of the track, puts lateral G through the engine and therefore takes power out of the engine. It's not actually going in a straight line. So the key to that, as I've always said, and this is something that I definitely learned from Rob Wilson, was to make sure that you make that move to the other side of the track at the last possible comfortable moment. You don't want to make that move when the car is still accelerating. When it's approaching terminal velocity, or as near as you can get to terminal velocity, that is the moment to move it across with the least possible downside. That you can't get away from the G that's going to go through the engine, but if you're going to have that lateral G going through the engine, do it when the car's almost at terminal velocity rather than when it's still accelerating. And for proof of that, if you're going to miss a gear on acceleration from, say, 0 to top gear, much better to miss 6th to 7th than 1st to 2nd. Missing 1st to 2nd will have a much bigger effect on your acceleration run than missing 6th to 7th. And so that is what applies there. Now, it was interesting with Lando because I was watching him on board for most of the session, and he was coming out of Ascari and actually not staying parallel to the white line at all. He was just diagonally across. But when he did that quickest lap on soft tyres, he moved a little bit to the left coming out, but then stayed there before moving again to the outside of the track. And I think that's Lando a little bit sandbagging, a little bit saying, right, this is what I'm actually going to be doing when I'm on a quick lap on my own. And I think it's because there are bumps on the right-hand side as you're coming out. If you do stay parallel to the white line, it's a little bit bumpy. And I think Lando got it absolutely right coming out of there. And Oscar is almost doing the same thing as Lando, but moving a little bit further and putting a little bit more G through the engine coming through there. And that's reflected, I think, in the difference that Lando's picking up 21 clicks coming out of there. Oscar's picking up only 17. Charles Leclerc, absolutely parallel to the white line, copybook. George Russell the same, absolutely perfect. Max Verstappen, interestingly, doing basically following what Lando's doing, or is Lando following Max, who knows, coming out, moving a little bit to the left, maybe avoiding the bumps, which is probably more important in a Red Bull than a McLaren, because as we know, the ride isn't great on the Red Bull, and then he's moving again to the left on the approach. And Lewis Hamilton is moving diagonally across. So Lewis is actually doing quite a good job there. Charles going down the right-hand side, Lewis going diagonally immediately across. Bit disappointing to see that. But look, both of them gaining exactly 20 kilometers an hour. So maybe I'm completely wrong. I don't think I am. I think you have to say what would be happening if they weren't doing that, and maybe Charles wouldn't be picking up quite as much speed. We'll see tomorrow again. I'll keep monitoring that. Now let's have a look at the fuel runs, because obviously this will be a big pointer of where we're going in the race. A big variety there in terms of what tyres were used. Most notably, Charles Leclerc was on soft tyres for his fuel run at the back end of FP2. Everybody did quite a lot of laps. We're talking about 12, 13, 15 laps in some cases. So it was quite indicative of where we are. And you can see the bottom there. These are Pirelli's estimates after the running today. The difference between the medium and the soft is about half a second. The difference between the hard and the medium, much closer gap, 0.2. And just as an aside, looks like because of that, it will be a one-stop strategy race, as it usually is at Monza. And this is the two McLaren drivers fighting with one another and inducing a two-stop strategy as we did last year. They'll be doing all they can not to repeat that, I'm sure. So let's have a look at the fuel runs now. So Lando Norris, quickest on the soft tyre, 19.8, and then quickest again on the fuel runs on his fifth lap, did a 23.2 on the medium tyre. Carlos Sainz, though, 23.3 on the medium tyre. We don't know how much fuel they're actually running here. Maybe Williams not running as much fuel. But interesting that the lap times are more or less similar, and they're doing the time more or less at the same time. Most people around lap 7, lap 8, when the track was presumably at its quickest. It's a very strange phenomenon, that one. But Carlos Sainz, 23.3, very impressive in the Williams. Alex Albon, 23.7, both on the mediums. George Russell, 23.3 also on the hard tyre, on the Mercedes. Now, they got that car running pretty well on the soft tyre. Not brilliantly, but look where he is on the fuel run. That's a very, very promising lap time and a promising run. Lap 7 for George. And if you factor in that 0.2 of a second a lap difference between the medium and the hard, that puts him right up there. The medium and hard looks to be a good combination. And Pirelli predict that by race day, most teams will only have one set of each left. And so you may see more teams running the soft tyre going into the race if they don't qualify particularly well, something like that. But from measure of how the soft tyre has performed, look at Charles Leclerc, who's on the soft tyre, had two massive moments, both at Ascari, just basically going straight on into the left as the soft tyre was getting overheated. But by lap 8, he was doing his quickest lap, 23.5 on the soft tyre. So the soft tyre definitely is a raceable tyre at the moment. We do have track evolution coming, so it may even get better in that respect. But Charles Leclerc doing a lot of good work there on that soft tyre for Ferrari. You could say, well, maybe he should be a bit quicker than that. But then again, if you're doing a long run with fuel in the car, I think that's quite an impressive lap time. Going back to it, Nico Hülkenberg also ran the hard tyre, 23.4, compared with George Russell, 23.3. So that's when I say come back to Nico Hülkenberg. Quick in a straight line and very good on fuel. And not bad with the soft tyre as well. And no doubt Gabriel Bortoleto will be up to speed tomorrow as well. So looking pretty good for Sauber Ferrari going into the weekend at Monza. Oscar Piastri, like Lando, ran the medium tyre, 23.2 for Lando, 23.4 for Oscar. Differences between Oscar and Lando showed up more in the soft tyre runs. But amazingly, unlike anybody else I could see, Oscar taking 7th gear between the two Lesmos, coming out of the first Lesmo in 6th, 5th and then 6th, and then getting 7th momentarily before going back 6th, 5th into the second Lesmo. Whereas Lando's just keeping it in 6th, like everybody else that I could see. And I thought that was an interesting thing. Whether or not it's Oscar just slowly building up speed and he lost FP1, he wasn't able to play around quite as much as he thought. Or whether that's something we're going to see going into the weekend, I don't know. But I imagine, I may be wrong here, but I imagine that getting 7th will allow you to settle the car a little bit more. And maybe it's going to be a way in the race for Oscar to look after the rears a bit more going through the second Lesmo, just getting 7th there, letting the car settle a little bit, not quite as screamy in 6th with revs, not leaning on the car quite as much going into the second Lesmo as a result, and just getting a bit more stable and getting more of a stable platform going through the second Lesmo. Again, we'll see if he changes back to just keeping it in 6th tomorrow when he's looked at all the telemetry. But that was the main difference. And Oscar also coming off the throttle and brakes a little bit going into the second Lesmo and the Parabolica compared with Lando. Normally it's Lando that has that lovely sort of floaty moment when he's on neither brakes nor throttle. But today it was Oscar who was doing that a little bit more momentarily. We're talking very, very small amounts of time, but just giving a little bit more room for the car to breathe. It looks to me as if Oscar's going into this race thinking, I've got to find a technique where I can look after the tyres. McLaren obviously aren't going to be mega quick in a straight line, although obviously DRS will come into play if they don't qualify at the front. But they're very good still, McLaren, in terms of grip and balance and the amount of energy that's going through the tyres. And I suspect Oscar's philosophy, it looks like his philosophy, even though he only did the one session today, is I'm going to make sure I'm going to find the best setup and the way of driving this car to look after the tyres. Whereas Lando looks to be just quick at the moment and going out and doing quick lap times. Again, we'll see what happens when they've had the debrief on the Friday night. Only other point to make was that Lewis Hamilton was complaining at one point about the engine not feeling great in medium speed corners. I think Ferrari got that sorted. Otherwise, Lewis looking pretty good, had a few moments. Oscar Piastri had a drama with the mirror. I don't think it would have affected his performance at all, just cracked the mirror, couldn't really see what was going on. And otherwise, a session with a few reds and a few VSCs because there's just gravel on the outside of most of the corners. And you only got to put a left rear off track coming out of the Lesmos, and all of a sudden there's gravel everywhere. And that would probably bring out a VSC in the race. I'm thinking about that. I mean, if a driver makes a mistake and puts gravel everywhere and continues, is that fair for everybody else? You know, I'm not sure. I wonder what Black Jack Brabham would think of that. The master of spraying gravel everywhere. Yeah, it's a little bit unfair, that, I think. Anyway, there were the two other moments just to talk about. One was Max when he had that rear go and he aborted the lap, and you could barely see it go. The other was Charles Leclerc. This was the run where he aborted and then did his lap time later on. Coming out of the first Lesmo, lost the rear and just millisecond, perfect control. You can see the back end moving at that sort of speed. It's really impressive to watch, and his car control was just amazing. As indeed was Lando Norris. I shouldn't forget that Lando Norris, before he did his quickest lap on the soft tyres, had a massive tail slide coming out of the second chicane. Just caught the edge of the gravel, but he was completely sideways. Good to see, actually. It's so sad that that's not the quick way of driving a Formula One car. But the impressive thing was that he had that moment. I just think the tyres probably weren't up to temperature at that point. It was in Sector 1. And on his quickest lap, therefore, he wasn't actually mega quick in Sector 1 because he's obviously leaving a bit of a margin into the second chicane or out of the second chicane there. And that was his quickest lap as it turned out. And he got it right, obviously, for the rest of the lap. So they were the other provisos in brackets that you need to build into the stats we've been looking at. At the moment, it's going to be quite an interesting race, quite close, I would think. Whether or not we see this progression for all the teams and drivers as we go into a more grippy track surface, weather looks good at Monza over the weekend, of course, remains to be seen. But in the meantime, looking good. It was a good Friday at Monza, lots going on. The fans loved it, and I thought the Ferraris, in their sort of version of the 1975 livery, celebrating 75, because this Italian Grand Prix in 75 was the race in which Niki Lauda clinched the Drivers' Championship, and Ferrari therefore clinched the Constructors' Championship, with Clay Regazzoni winning the Italian Grand Prix for the second time. And the livery you're seeing on the Ferraris is the exact red of 75. Much nicer red, actually, than anything we've seen since 75, I think. Car looks superb, and I love the script they've got as well, which is that 1975 script. And I think we're going to see the drivers and mechanics in sort of 75 spec overall livery anyway, colours, on race day, which is something to look forward to. So yeah, all looking good. I'll be back with another video tomorrow, of course, and on race day. In the meantime, big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to REC Watches, and to Track Ninja for their support of this channel. Great to have them behind us, and of course, thank you for watching. See you tomorrow. Well, it was classic Monza, a bit like the race, blink and you miss it. Qualifying was a little bit like that. Lots going on all the time, enhanced by the short lap and how quick the lap is at Monza. Quite difficult on occasions to take everything in. One moment, Lando Norris is in Q2, on the bubble, slower than Gabriel Bortoleto, who's on used tyres, and just gets into Q3 on his last lap after the checkered flag has been shown to some of the cars. And Lando again on his first run in Q3, not good, but then blisteringly quick. Well, not blisteringly, hopefully in terms of the Pirellis. Very, very quick in the second phase of Q3. But Max Verstappen on the pole. As I said yesterday, the Red Bull looking a lot better with this new floor. It's kind of tuned to the low downforce circuit, but I'd be willing to bet this floor is going to stay on the car for the rest of the year, or derivatives thereof. As I said on Friday, most teams bringing obviously smaller wings for Monza for the low downforce setup, but Red Bull going a step further and having a different floor as well, a revised floor, a development floor. And Max, really from the get-go on Friday, not complaining at all about the usual things on the Red Bull. Had a lot of traffic yesterday, disguised the lap time, as I said yesterday. So no real surprise actually to see him on the pole. 18.7. For a while out there, Lando looked as if he had pulled one out of the bag and got the pole after all those dramas in Q2 and in the beginning of Q3. But it was Max right at the end who gazumped Lando. Lando quicker than Oscar Piastri, who's P3, obviously in the other McLaren-Mercedes. Not a bad result for him on a weekend so far when Lando looks to have been slightly quicker, as predicted around Monza. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton 4th and 5th for Ferrari. Pretty good. Pretty disappointing, I suppose, if you're a Tifosi and you're out there hoping that Charles was going to be on the pole. Bit of a strange qualifying session for Charles Leclerc because he was really quick in the first phase of Q3. Looked as if he'd be fighting for the pole when he put on his second set of soft tyres. But as he came in at the end of that first run in Q3, they said, "Any changes, Charles?" And he said, +1 on the front flap. And then he changed his mind as he's going through the parabolic and said, no, +2 on the front flap. Now, if you look at the top speeds thereafter, no real differences, but for sure it affected the balance. And Charles, one of the few not to go quicker on that second phase of Q3. So he'll be very disappointed with that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If they hadn't touched the car, who knows where Charles would have qualified. Anyway, they can make adjustments. Again, they'll probably go back to where they were. Lewis Hamilton not far away from Charles Leclerc. He'll be pretty pleased with that. On what is obviously a home race for him in many regards, Ferrari. George Russell, incredibly quick in Q1 on the medium tyre. Indeed, fastest of all. So much so that he didn't even have to go out and do a time in the second phase of Q1. Kimi Antonelli, also on mediums. Presumably they were thinking just save the softs at this point. Did struggle on the mediums, had to put softs on to get through into Q2. But George, very, very quick on the mediums, and disappointing for Mercedes that as he drove out of the pit lane at the beginning of Q3, he said, "I'm on the softs. I thought you were going to put me on the mediums again." And you could see the faces sink at Mercedes. Now, whether there was a lack of communication, whether they overruled George, who knows? But given his pace in Q1, how quick he was on the mediums, I'm sure George would have been quicker than 19.1 on the mediums in Q3 had he had the tyres of his choice. As it was, just fractionally quicker than his teammate Kimi Antonelli, who did a very good job after a messy day yesterday. Still not looking 100% comfortable through the fast corners. He's turning in wider and later into the fast corners than he ever does, comparatively speaking, through the slower and medium speed corners. But nonetheless, very good job to be up there just behind George. Gabriel Bortoleto, absolutely superb. As I said yesterday, the Sauber Ferrari looking very, very strong. Nico Hülkenberg, very good, very quick yesterday. I did say I thought Bortoleto would be right there today, and indeed he was into Q3, and a very, very quick lap time, 19.3. Super impressive to be ahead of Fernando Alonso and Yuki Tsunoda, both of whom really should have been ahead of a Sauber Ferrari, you got to say that. Oliver Behrmann, very good in the Haas Ferrari, again substantially quicker than his teammate Esteban Ocon, just failed to make it through into Q3. Nico Hülkenberg, as I say, also quick in the other Sauber Ferrari. Williams faded somewhat today, a bit messy as they looked a little bit yesterday, but lots of moments through the Lesmos, lots of gravel being sprayed. Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon will be disappointed with not going through into Q3, but kind of, where you would expect them to be on a circuit like this. They are not Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri, or indeed Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton. It's a different sort of driver combination, and I think it comes down to Carlos was really good when he was alongside Charles Leclerc. You had the two extremes of style, but now in the other car he's got a very quick driver, admittedly very, very soft inputs, lovely to watch, but both of them wide corner entry drivers, classic late entry drivers, wide long corners. And I think that's the result on a circuit like Monza. No surprise that. Esteban Ocon 19.7, disappointed, didn't get a toe when he wanted one, but equally never really looked like being as quick as his teammate Oliver Behrman, who did a very good job. Isaac Hadjar, Liam Lawson really struggling with the Racing Bulls. How things change. Lots of medium speed, slow speed downforce on the Racing Bulls at Zandvoort, but here at Monza, a big struggle for them. But then again, we predicted this at the start of the year. Some teams would sit fairly in the sweet spot for no apparent reason from one circuit and then fall away at the next. Here it's the Sauber Ferraris that look really good. At Zandvoort, of course, it was the Racing Bulls. Lance Stroll disappointing yet again, and the two Alpines off the pace, even though Pierre Gasly has just signed a new contract with Alpine. Feel a bit sorry for him having to do that. I guess it's just the lack of any other decent option out there. He deserves a better car than that, but anyway, let's hope when they go to Mercedes engines, no doubt they will have a better team, better car there, I'm sure. Liam Lawson last, 20.2, Isaac Hadjar 19.9. But let's now try to make some sense of what actually happened in qualifying and how Max got the pole compared with the two McLaren drivers and Charles Leclerc. Bear in mind that Charles Leclerc's lap time was done in the first phase of Q3. He did a 19.2 on his second run with that additional front flap, and so I've included that 19.0 lap. So hopefully this gives a reasonable picture of how the laps were put together and how the grid has taken its shape. As you can see, I've divided the circuit down to various key moments. These are moments of time. The numbers are kilometers an hour. They were doing at those specific moments, so we can kind of compare them and then maybe draw some conclusions of where they're going. So going down the pit straight, 3:48 for Max Verstappen. This is all on their quickest laps in Q3. So it's the pole lap for Max, second quickest lap for Lando and so forth. So 3:48, pretty good. Charles Leclerc quickest in a straight line there in terms of aerodynamics. The Ferrari, maybe it's power as well, who knows, but certainly the Ferrari quick through the air, 3:51 compared with Max 3:48, compared with the McLaren's 3:46. And Max has a slight advantage in terms of terminal velocity before they hit the brakes going into the first chicane. First chicane, you see two numbers there. That's the speed through the right-hander and then the left-hander. Right-hander's obviously a little bit quicker than the left-hander. Interesting there, I think, how slow, relatively slow Max Verstappen is out of the first chicane. I've always made a big point of how good he is there and how good Lewis Hamilton is there as well. Max quick going in, yeah, fair enough. Short corners, breaking into a rotation point, but then again showing the sort of patience that he showed in turn 9 at Zandvoort, 73 kilometers an hour when the two McLarens are doing 76, 75, and indeed Charles Leclerc doing 75. But then they accelerate through the gears into the long right-hander where there is G, obviously, the Curva Grande. And in the middle of the Curva Grande, look at that, Max Verstappen 307 compared with the two McLarens 305, 302, and Charles Leclerc 309. So compared with where he was on the exit of turn 2, the first chicane, Max has picked up a lot of speed, and that's because he's got the car straighter than the two McLaren drivers. Charles Leclerc has done a similar thing, and because he's got a little bit more speed through the air, that shows up through the middle of the Curva Grande. So there you've got two short corner drivers, Max and Charles Leclerc, really benefiting from the work they did coming out of or in the middle of the first chicane. Now we come to the second chicane, and again, look at the two short corner drivers, Max and Charles Leclerc, how slow they are relative to the McLaren drivers going into the second chicane. That's a classic thing, again, of not wanting to rush it, just getting into a rotation point that's going to work for their exit. And let's see what happens on exit there. Max Verstappen is coming out of the second chicane at 1:31. Lando Norris 1:28 on his quickest lap. Big difference. Oscar Piastri, however, has gone in a little bit quicker than Max, but coming out at 1:34. Very, very good. And Charles Leclerc, even better, 1:11 going in slow, but very, very good exit, 1:36. So right there, you got to say, Charles Leclerc looking incredibly impressive. How did he not get the pole, you might well ask? Well, let's see what happens now at the first Lesmo. Max not quick through either of the two Lesmos, both of them quick right-handers, as you can see. 2:10 for Max mid-corner, 2:17 for Lando, really quick. Oscar just slightly slower, 2:16, and Charles 2:14. Not as quick as the McLarens, but again quicker than Max Verstappen through the first Lesmo. Second Lesmo, 1:93 though for Max Verstappen, 1:90 for Charles Leclerc. Now what's happened here is he maybe overused the tyres. The tyres getting a little bit hotter. He's had a couple of moments coming out of the second Lesmo. But whatever's happening there, the Ferrari's starting to slide and he's lost speed. 1:97 however for Lando Norris, 1:95 for Oscar Piastri. That just shows you how good and how much efficient downforce the McLaren generates. Even around Monza on those two particular corners, the second Lesmo, a good example. And just to carry on from yesterday, I made the point that Oscar Piastri was getting 7th between the first and second Lesmos before going straight down to 5th, whereas Lando keeps it in 6th and then goes to 5th. Well, he was doing the same thing today. Lando was keeping it in 6th, but Charles Leclerc also doing what Oscar Piastri is doing. And one other driver I saw doing that and doing extremely well as a result was Oliver Behrman, also getting 7th just before the second Lesmo and going back to 5th, letting the car settle a little bit. So really nice bit of driving there by Behrman. Going back to the second Lesmo, right now you're saying this has got to be McLaren's lap, hasn't it? I mean, suddenly look at Oscar Piastri, 1:95. Look at Lando Norris, 1:97. Really impressive. Anyway, they're going down the back straight now, 3:41. Ferrari again a little bit quicker through the air. The other three cars basically the same terminal velocity before they go into the Ascari chicane. And this really is where everything changes. Because again, look at the two short corner drivers, Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, both going in relatively slowly, looking for the rotation point, looking to make sure that when they get the change of direction, they're not overloading the back of the car or the left front or anything like that. They're just making sure they've got everything as balanced and as stable as they possibly can. So into the Ascari section, Lando Norris 2:02, Oscar Piastri 2:09, unbelievably quick into Ascari. But then mid-corner, 2:32, Max is 2:31 mid-corner, Lando's now 2:33 mid-corner, whereas Charles Leclerc, again, I think this is the Ferrari overheating its tyres, just doesn't have the same amount of downforce as the other three cars now. Only 2:27 mid-corner, and this is where Charles Leclerc's lap falls away, and this potentially is where he was thinking, I'm going to add 2 more holes of front flap, which was a mistake, I think, because he didn't go any quicker. Anyway, have a look at the exit speed now from Ascari. This tells the story. Max Verstappen, having gone in at 1:95 compared with 2:09 for Oscar Piastri, is coming out of Ascari with the car beautifully balanced, all the load out of the car, obviously at this point, 260 kilometers an hour. Oscar Piastri's 257, Lando Norris 258. So already Max has made up that deficiency and he's now ahead of both McLarens on the exit of Ascari. And he does a nice job on the exit of Ascari. He doesn't sit on the white line the way Charles Leclerc does all the way down the straight, but he moves it towards the middle of the road and then to the left, whereas Oscar particularly, and Lando now to some extent, not quite as much, but Oscar just immediately moves across in a diagonal. Lando almost the same, doesn't go quite as far to the left of the road. And as I said yesterday, that's putting a lot more lateral G through the engine and costing both McLaren drivers revs. And I would say, this is only my opinion, but if Lando was doing what Charles Leclerc was doing out of Ascari and sitting on that white line for as long as he could and then moving to the left, I think he would have got the pole because the difference was so small. It was something like that, the revs that are going through the engine. I don't know how many revs it would be, possibly not 100 revs even, but it certainly would have had an effect on the engine on that run all the way down to the Parabolica. Speaking of which, mid-corner Parabolica, Max 231, Lando 232, Oscar Piastri 234, Charles Leclerc 235. So I guess he's let the tyres cool down a bit here, and he's doing a good job then. As I go to the start-finish line, Max is the slowest over the start-finish line, but he's got the pole. 316, 319 for Lando, 318 for Oscar, and 322 for Charles Leclerc. So if you took those numbers without knowing the lap times, it would be very difficult to work out, I think, who actually had got the quickest lap. But if we have a look at the sectors, you can actually see how Max got the pole there. He was quickest in Sector 1 and Sector 3, and he was third quickest in Sector 2. So Sector 1, Max was quickest, and I think a lot of that was what he was doing out of Turn 1 towards Curva Grande and then after Curva Grande, and how much load he had out of the Red Bull and how well he was and cleanly and lightly he was accelerating the car. Yeah, Max Verstappen quickest in Sector 1. Charles Leclerc, again, no surprise, the two short corner drivers in Sector 1. Sector 2 is all about the speed of the McLarens through the Lesmos, in my opinion. And Sector 3, Max quickest, but only just. It was very close. And as I say, if Lando, I think, had picked up a few more revs coming out of Ascari, it was a scrappy qualifying session for Lando because all that drama in Q2 happened because on his first flying lap in Q2, he outbraked himself going into that first chicane and just missed the chicane. So at that point, they brought him into the pits again and sent him out to do one run. He had to do 2 push laps on that second set of new soft tyres. And not surprisingly, he left quite a lot of margin in Sector 1 at the beginning of Q3, just in his mind, I guess, getting a banker lap. So he didn't really have any reference points in terms of doing a high 18 as distinct from a low 19. He just had to go out and do it on his second run, which Lando's quite capable of doing. He's been around long enough to do that. But for Max, it was a different situation because in the first phase of Q3, Charles Leclerc was quickest with a 19.0. And then right at the end of that first phase on his run, Max did an 18.9 to make him quickest. So he went into the last phase of Q3 the quickest guy on the track, and an 18.9 became the 18.7 that we see in the data here. Whereas Lando was coming from nowhere really to try and get the pole from Max. So it was a much more complicated and difficult session for Lando to manage. For all that, it was an enthralling qualifying session. A good example of why we don't need sprint races. We don't need any more artificial stuff in Formula One. This was an absorbing, captivating qualifying session. And so far as the general crowd were concerned, it was very difficult to predict what the front row was going to be. They were all rooting, obviously, for Ferrari, and it was a shame that Charles did make those changes to the front flaps because he was quick. He was really quick, and it'll be interesting to see how they go tomorrow. I guess they'll be trying to stretch the race out, make sure above all they do their one-stop strategy. McLaren will have to make sure they don't overuse the tyres. Oscar, as I say, has that business of taking 7th just before the second Lesmo, which gives the car a little bit more room to breathe just before he's loading up the tyres again. And Lando will be looking, of course, to take the race to Max. He needs to try and win this one for sure. And on that subject, let's just have a look at top speeds because it's going to be quite relevant to the race tomorrow. Max, in terms of the speed trap, 3:48 compared with Lando 3:45, Oscar 3:45. Charles quickest of that group, and Lewis 3:52, 3:54. Charles Leclerc. And Gabriel Bortoleto, amazingly quick, 3:55. I thought when I saw that, that's got to be a toe. But then he kept doing 3:55. And Nico Hülkenberg did a 3:55 as well. So I think that's a real time for the Sauber Ferrari. So that will be a very difficult car to pass, even if you're in his TRS tomorrow. So that'll be interesting to see that one. So the Ferrari is slightly quicker than the Red Bull, which is slightly quicker than the McLarens. And George Russell is doing a sort of Red Bull type top speed as well. But put him on the medium tyre or even the hard, he's probably going to fly as well. So watch out for George in the race. So yeah, enthralling qualifying session. See what happens tomorrow. Before we go, a very quick word about the special edition, limited edition REC watch to commemorate Ayrton Senna's 1986 Lotus 98T chassis number 4. The tachymeter of this, as I say, limited edition watch includes the alley from the plenum tubes built by Team Lotus for that engine. Obviously there was a major plenum chamber, but the tubes made of alley made by Team Lotus, and that alley has now been reformed into this watch, limited edition. They're going quickly. Details in the description below this video. Ayrton raced, of course, this car in the Italian Grand Prix at Monza in '86. Wasn't a great day for him. Gearbox went on the line, hadn't qualified that well either. But in the second half of the year, when Ayrton drove that car, he had 2 seconds in Germany and Hungary and finished the year with a very good third in Mexico before, unfortunately, a retirement in Australia, but some great results. And it was the last Grand Prix Lotus to be liveried in black and gold as well. So this watch commemorates that. So there we go. Looking forward to the race tomorrow. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to Track Ninja, to REC Watches, and to OEM Exclusive, and of course you, the viewer, for watching. See you tomorrow. As brilliant as Max Verstappen's drive was today to win the Pirelli Italian Grand Prix at Monza, as brilliant as the performance of Red Bull as a team was today as well, Max couldn't hide that hint of anger in his eyes in the moments after getting out of the car. Why? Very simple. He hated giving that position back to Lando Norris, and I totally get that. I think Red Bull made exactly the right call, and it was a very difficult call to make after everything that happened in Spain when they made a call before the FIA stewards had weighed in. But they told Max to give that position back as he was going to the Parabolica on lap 1. Max came back on the radio and said, "Are you sure?" And they said, "Yes, give it back, Max." At which point he feathered the throttle coming down the pit straight. This is at the end of the first flying lap. Braked slightly and let Lando pass back into the lead. He hated that for one very good reason, and that is because when Lando went down the inside of Max at the start, very good start by Lando, not detracting from that at all, he ran very wide in the middle of turn 1, the right-hander. And if Max actually hadn't gone off-road, they would have touched for sure. But you can't argue that, you can't talk about that, and the sporting regulations always favour the overtaking car because they want lots of overtaking in Formula 1. And I think it was more that Max knew there was nothing he could do about it, and that the team had made exactly the right call that made it burn inside him. Obviously, I'll get over that very quickly. But that was just an insight, I thought, into the way Max Verstappen is as a racing driver. It'd be very easy to come in from 30,000 feet, have a look at this Italian Grand Prix, say, what a walkover win for Max Verstappen, boring race, whatever they might want to say. But they wouldn't take that into account. Max absolutely livid about that. And what a job he did after that. It's difficult to remember the last time a leader of a race had to give a lead away to the P2 guy, and then immediately repasses virtually within 4 laps. He's back in front again and pulling away and going on to win the race. Doesn't happen very often, but absolutely superb drive by Max thereafter. You could say that was a slight blemish, I guess, that first corner, but absolutely perfect after that. And if you look at the way he drove the lap after he passed Lando going into 1 at the beginning of lap 4, he was early on the brakes, he was stable on the entry to the slow corners, he wasn't brilliantly quick through the Lesmos, but he focused very much on the exit of Ascari and then the exit of the Parabolica. Made it look easy, in other words. Yes, Red Bull had a top speed advantage, but yes, Max Verstappen absolutely took it out 100% to its extreme, to the point where when DRS in play, it only took Max 1 lap to be beyond Lando's reach with DRS, and that summed up the day, summed up the race. Lando making small mistakes as ever, Oscar Piastri making small mistakes as ever, Max making no mistakes whatsoever. He was caught a little bit out by the gravel at the first Lesmo. And guess whose gravel it was? Lando Norris's. And I think that made Max smile. But of course, it was never going to be easy to beat the McLarens, as good as they are, and the downforce that they have, the inherent efficient downforce they have in that car, even if they're a little bit slower in a straight line. The McLaren's really quick through the Lesmos, a true litmus test of how good a car is. So Max had to be perfect out of Ascari, through the Parabolica, and certainly through turns 1 and 2 as well, on that run through the Curva Grande. That's where he could get his advantage over the McLarens. Very technical bits of road where it's very easy to make mistakes, as we saw with the McLaren drivers, but Max did none of that. And of course, there was another dimension to this. Because of that inherent efficient downforce advantage that McLaren have, it was pretty clear by half distance that McLaren were going to run the race as long as they could, that first stint as long as they could, probably to come in for softs towards the end. That made it quite a difficult race for Red Bull and Max to strategize, because should they counter by also running to soft tyres at the end of the race, or should they stick to the normal medium hard strategy as suggested by Pirelli? It was difficult to make, and I personally had no idea what they were going to do, whether they were going to go to softs or hards on Max's car. Bearing in mind that he hadn't done very much running at all on the hard, it was a difficult call, as I say, but they put him on the hard. Max totally confident, straight out and unbelievably quick on the hard tyre, knowing he could lean on it. And of course that's a great thing for Red Bull, to know that if they give Max Verstappen the hard tyre, he's just going to be able to lean on it and be super quick without any issues with the tyre going off. And that's what happened. McLaren, I thought, were better once the medium tyre had gone off, and it went off sooner on the McLaren in the first stint compared with the Red Bull, because of the amount of energy McLaren putting through the tyre, through the Lesmos, and indeed going into Ascari and probably going into Parabolica as well, just leaning on the tyre a little bit more heat through the tyre. But the interesting thing was that after a while, the balance came back. Even though the grip level had come down slightly, the balance came back. And the balance came back more for the McLarens than it did for the Red Bull. Max at one point was asked, this is in about the middle of the first stint, what are your thoughts on front flap at the pit stop? Should we add, should we subtract? And he said, no, it's pretty good. And then towards the end of the run, he said, no, I think we should go for one extra hole on the front flap. So things were changing for Max in a way that they were not changing for McLaren. Of course, from McLaren's point of view, running very late into the race and leaving their pit stops for the two cars was always going to put them under a different sort of pressure, i.e. two perfect pit stops, very little time to recover if they're not perfect, if they're imperfect. Getting the two cars in and out very efficiently, and of course going to the soft tyre and making sure they maximise the advantage on the soft tyre. Personally, I think they left it too long. Piastri came in lap 47, Lando came in lap 48 for the soft tyres. And if we go back and look at the fuel runs on Friday, when the track was nothing like as grippy as it is now, you can see there Charles Leclerc was on the soft, and he did a 23.5 on lap 8 of the stint. And that would translate, really, extrapolate into maybe lap 10 or lap 11, given the amount of grip there was by Sunday. And he's doing about the same time, 23.5 compared with Oscar 23.4, Lando 23.2, a little bit earlier in the stint, admittedly. So had they come in a little bit earlier, it would have put a little bit more pressure on Max. Easy to say that in hindsight, but certainly it was something we talked about while the race was in real time. The other point, of course, was that it gave Max the freedom to be able to get through the safety car window once he'd put on the hard tyre. He knew that he had to reduce what was about an 18-second gap down to about 9.5 in order to be in a comfortable safety car window. In other words, if towards the end of the race there was a safety car, he would still retain the lead even if the McLarens came in for their tyres at that point. And that gave Max a little bit more room. Leaving their pit stop so late for McLaren gave Max a nice little window with not much traffic in it either, just to chip away. It wasn't even chip, it was chiseling. It was hammering away at the two McLarens, second and a half and lap sometimes, depending on how many mistakes they made. And sure enough, he had it down to 9.5 seconds within the safety car window now, safe that he would win the race, lead the race, if both McLarens came in at any point from here on in, regardless of the situation. And he had that, and McLaren kind of gave him that window. I suppose from McLaren's point of view, they were thinking, let's see if there is a safety car, we'll stay out for as long as possible. But there wasn't. There were a few incidents. There was an Oliver Burman Carlos Sainz skirmish at the second chicane, but both of them kept going, and there was no safety car for that. And that was about it. And McLaren threw the dice there. So the dice for them really was more, we will gamble on there being a safety car, than we'll be really quick at the end of the race on soft tyres and beat Max Verstappen or force him into an error. That was never going to happen. And by the time they both stopped, Max was back in the lead and controlling an 18-second lead, absolutely no problem at all. And on hard tyres, going as quickly as the two McLarens on the soft tyres. Of course, there's another story there, and that is the pit stop drama for Lando Norris, the left front. Felt sorry for the gunner on the left front. It just looked like he needed to touch the gun again just to get the green to allow the McLaren to go. But a very, very fast stop for Oscar Piastri, under 2 seconds. And then something like a 5-second stop for Lando Norris. McLaren did the completely obvious thing, which was then to ask Oscar to give P2 back to Lando Norris. They did that because if they didn't, the situation and the pressure with Lando would begin to mount internally within the team, given what happened at Zandvoort, his retirement at Zandvoort. So that was one very good reason. They also did it because they knew Oscar would say, okay, because from his point of view, it wasn't that big a deal. It wasn't for the win. It was for P2, P3. And from Oscar's point of view, that earned him, again, a lot of points within the team as Mr. Nice Guy who will respond to team orders straight away. But I can tell you this, if that was for the win, if Max Verstappen had not been in the game today and Lando Norris had been leading that Italian Grand Prix from the start, and that pit stop had given the lead to Oscar Piastri, even if McLaren had asked Piastri to give him the win, there's no way in the world Oscar would have done that, in my opinion. He's a racer, and a win is a win. A P2, P3, it's not quite the same, particularly if you've got the lead in the championship that he's got. And as I say, this will probably come back to help Oscar as we go forward now, because there might well be situations in reverse where Lando will now have to do it for Oscar. So everybody happy afterwards, except Oscar, I think, was a little bit wistful about the whole thing. He had to be wistful because nobody likes slowing down and giving away position. And it was the right call by McLaren to protect their, as I say, to protect their pressure-filled internal dramas if it had been another issue for Lando. And equally, they had a second and a third on a circuit on which they will fly away from, thinking we didn't have the quickest car today. I'm not sure they're right if they think that. I think that the McLaren was potentially at least as quick, not potentially, it was at least as quick as the Red Bull, if not slightly quicker. I just think Max did a better job as a racing driver than both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. No mistakes. Let's exclude what happened in the first corner. Let's not call that a mistake. That was the race. No other mistakes. Whereas Lando ran wide coming out of the Lesmos. Oscar had a bit of a drama with Charles Leclerc early on. When the Lando Max thing happened on the first corner, Oscar backed away just to make sure that he wasn't near either of them, and Charles got a nice run on him coming out of turn 2, got into third place, was weaving quite a lot, but obviously very quick on the straight, no DRS at this point, the Ferrari quite difficult. But then Oscar on that opening lap round the outside of Charles Leclerc at the first Lesmo, very impressive to watch. Charles just thought he'd got P3, no problem at all, turns into the Lesmos to find Oscar Piastri on his outside. Oscar goes past, but then Charles got him again going into turn 1. And for 2 or 3 laps, Oscar was kind of behind Charles and complaining quite a lot on the radio. He's moving this, he's doing that. A bit unlike Oscar, actually. Normally he's fairly quiet and calm in those situations. But once the race settled down a little bit, and the Ferrari's tyres started to go off pretty quickly on the Leclerc car, then Oscar was down the outside into 1 and pulling away. So, yeah, you could say a couple of slight glitches there for Oscar, but not really. You can't really put them as real mistakes, just sort of the opening lap skirmish stuff more than anything else. But nonetheless, if you weigh that alongside Lando's drive, where there were a few little driving errors as well, and he was continually doing that thing where he just diagonals coming out of Ascari. Now, you might say Max was doing the same thing. Everybody was in the race. Of course, in the race, coming out of Ascari, it's a very different story to qualifying when you're on your own. And Charles and both Charles and George were both coming out of Ascari. That's because it's the lowest common denominator. That's because that's what everybody else basically is doing. And in the race, you've got to do that because there's too much debris, too many marbles either side of the racing line coming out of there to take that risk. That's why Max was doing that. On a qualifying lap, you saw him once or twice, he'd stay down by the white. But in the race, he was always coming out, not as far as Lando, coming out to just left of centre and then moving across a little bit more as he approached Parabolica. That was the groove, and he did that absolutely millimetre perfect every lap of the race. Great to watch. But in the race also, of course, if you're in traffic and you're following the car in front, you do what that car in front is doing out of Ascari. So there was no discussion there. The other thing I'd say about Lando's race is that after that opening lap, or during the opening lap going into Ascari, I think it was, he got on the radio to say Max not only ran wide and used the track to hold position, used the runoff area to hold position, but also forced me off onto the grass. Now, I think that was fairly disingenuous of Lando. It was worth trying it, of course, but everybody knows, especially the drivers, that the track narrows going into turn 1, and that if you are going to be on the outside, it wasn't as if Max had the right-hand side of the Red Bull on the white line. There was room there, but you know it narrows, and Max had his car in the position for Lando to back off slightly and go in behind him into 1. That's, I guess, obviously what he thought he was going to do. But Lando stayed on it on the grass, lifted the throttle on the grass, and the track's now narrowing. And he's now alongside Max going into the braking area into 1. And from Max's perspective, he's braking much, much later than Max. And he can feel that the McLaren's going to run wide. Max admittedly always brakes quite early into 1. But nonetheless, he can feel in his peripheral vision that Lando's going to run wide. And that's why he does what he does. And that's why he was so annoyed, as I say, after the race. Didn't show it in terms of his facial expression, didn't show it in terms of, didn't give it away in terms of anything he said. He was Mr. Polite, Mr. I've just won the Italian Grand Prix. But look into his eyes, and you can see there how annoyed he was about that. So a great win, that was a case study on how to win a Grand Prix in maybe not the best car. Just a brilliant drive by Max Verstappen, I thought. A great Grand Prix from start to finish. I guess you might say not a lot of overtakes, but so what? Because DRS isn't that effective. We had some great defences and we had some great moves, and it was just a very, very good Grand Prix from beginning to end, I thought. And I think the Red Bull much improved with that revised, upgraded floor they have. And it'll be interesting to see how they go in Baku and Singapore. Slower circuits for the most part, long straight obviously in Baku. But it'll be interesting to see how they go now, because the Red Bull looks to be a pretty good car in terms of balance, in terms of grip level. All the stuff that Max used to complain about, no front end and bouncing a little bit here and the back ends all over the place. None of that came up this weekend. And I suspect that a lot of that is due to the floor. And of course, the other thing about Max, what a drive. Because as he came up to take the checkered flag, guess who was in front of him just about to be lapped? His teammate, Yuki Tsunoda. And if that doesn't tell you everything about how good Max's drive was, then I don't know what does. Absolutely superb. And McLaren, I think, will come away thinking, well, we didn't quite have the performance here. We'll get to a slower circuit again. We'll see how we go there. Should be all right. But realistically, I think it was the drivers that got beaten today by Max Verstappen rather than the McLaren car as such. I think the McLaren car was a very good one. The Ferrari, which finished fourth in the hands of Charles Leclerc and sixth in the hands of Lewis Hamilton, was, to put it bluntly, disappointing. Obviously, the tyres went off very, very quickly. And like everybody else, they kept some sort of balance once the tyres had gone off, and it wasn't that bad. And indeed, for all of the race, Charles Leclerc managed to hold off George Russell, which was a real feat, bearing in mind George started on his beloved mediums like everybody else, and then went to the hard. He was always going to be competitive on the hard and the medium, George. And yet Charles beat him. Very, very good drive by Charles Leclerc in that respect. No mistakes at all, but a difficult day for Ferrari. They didn't take any step forward on a circuit which should have rewarded a lot of their positive points, top speed being a very good example, whereas Red Bull did. So Charles Leclerc P4, George Russell P5, good drive, but he'll be annoyed. Top speed didn't allow him to get past the Ferrari, even in DRS, but he beat Lewis Hamilton, who was P6. Lewis, for the most part, was doing about the same lap times as Charles, so he'll come away from Monza feeling reasonably confident that he's kind of there or thereabouts and where he needs to be within the Ferrari team. So it was a positive day for Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari. Alex Albon, again in the points, drove very well in the Williams-Mercedes, had a few dramas, as he often does, but managed to still finish seventh. And Gabriel Bortoleto just got eighth on the last lap from Kimi Antonelli. What a battle between these two, bearing in mind one of them's in a factory Mercedes and the other is in a Sauber Ferrari. An Audi, you could say, I suppose. Amazing that Bortoleto won that battle. Very, very good drive by Bortoleto. Not amazing, just impressive that he did. Kimi Antonelli was ninth. And Isaac Hadjar, from nowhere, managed to score a point yet again, finished 10th in the Racing Bulls Honda, a car that wasn't very good around Monza, but again, Isaac Hadjar got the absolute maximum from it and drove extremely well. Carlos Sainz had his incidents, as ever, as he always would, finished 11th. Oliver Behrman, I thought, drove very well to finish 12th. He was behind Gabriel Bortoleto for a lot of the race. He came in quite early, quite a short first stint to get out of traffic. It didn't really work. He was behind Bortoleto for much of the middle phase of the race, going about a tenth of a second a lap slower than Bortoleto, which I thought was very, very good, very impressive. And he finished 12th ahead of Yuki Tsunoda in the works Red Bull Honda, so he can be very pleased about that. And a big thanks to Jetcraft, to Track Ninja, to OEM Exclusive, and of course to REC Watches for their support of this channel, and to you too for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll be back doing some live streams this week. See you then.